Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup, brought to you by the Cover One Network and some other sponsors that we'll get to later. We are now all the way through the preseason, which means the regular season is just on the horizon. But before we get to all that, there is, of course, cut down day. I believe the final cut downs are tomorrow. A lot of names are going to get moved around. A lot of different players are going to get cut. Some are going to have the opportunity of a lifetime, and this is all across the league. A lot of moves and a lot of news are going to be made in the next 24 hours. So we have a lot to talk about. We'll recap the Bears game on Saturday. We'll talk about our final 53-man projection. We got the roster right here. But before we get all the way into that, Uber, how are you?
I'm good. I will say, as far as cut down day goes, and we'll get into it more, I have seen a bigger emphasis from analysts and fans this year than previous years, saying these are very somber days. These are kind of sad because you're watching a lot of guys' dreams, not come true. But then there's a couple guys whose dreams are going to come true. So it's an interesting 48-hour span that really ends. That actually doesn't even end tomorrow at 4 p.m. It really just gets started at 4 p.m. Then it's just going to be chaos.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot that happens in between now and then. There's a lot of phones being answered, there's all sorts of different things that are happening behind the scenes. It's a lot to go through in a single day or just the 24-hour period that's going on right now. It's going to be tough. There's going to be some players that have played well in this preseason that will end up getting cut and need a new team. And part of that really just comes down to having a roster like the Bills have right now, which is pretty darn good. So you need to get rid of some players that have played well. So it's tough. It's going to be interesting. We're going to also talk a little bit about some news here and there. They did make some cuts earlier. I can't remember if it was today or Sunday, but they've made some cuts already, which pretty much all of them, not all that surprising, but we'll get into that. We'll talk about maybe some trade rumors. Yeah, we'll get into all of that. But the first thing that we're going to do is talk about one of our lovely sponsors, and that is Underdog Fantasy. Folks, with the regular season coming up, that means fantasy football season is coming up. If you have not gotten into your home league, or really if you just want to do more, let me tell you something. Underdog Fantasy is for you. You have all the fun of drafting your own players, but without the waivers and the lineup decisions. Best ball drafts allow you to have all the fun of drafting your team, all the chances to win big, and none of the week-to-week hassle. If you use the promo code COVER1 when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is 100 free US dollars that you can use with Underdog Fantasy, one of the best, if not the best, name in fantasy football out there right now. Again, if you use promo code COVER1 as the number one, making your first deposit, Underdog Fantasy will match that deposit up to $100. Sign up today and start winning today. That is probably our longest running sponsor, definitely the longest running sponsor of the show. I could say that much. But yeah, it's fantasy football season. We're all in it. You and I are both in this very, very lengthy draft with the other Cover One guys with Underdog Fantasy. You seem to have a very interesting strategy going on right now.
Well, I mean, one of them, I have three quarterbacks. I did not mean to have three quarterbacks. I just missed a pick. But yeah, I guess the rest of my strategy is pretty interesting. I almost went no wide receivers, which I don't know if that's a great fantasy football strategy.
Generally speaking, that's not the best way to go about things. But, who's to tell you no?
We'll see at the end of the year.
That's true. So that is our first sponsor. We'll get into One Pass a little bit later. Let's talk some news. First thing, Bills made some cuts. There were kind of no major guys that were cut, in my opinion. The most significant name that I saw was Jay Sternberger, who they brought in late, right? That was in the middle of training camp or maybe even during training, like right before training camp. I can't quite remember, but this is somebody that had a lot of potential coming into the season, had a lot, or just coming into the NFL rather when he came out of college, but just hasn't put it together, has had some injuries and had his opportunities, obviously, but just couldn't capitalize on them with this team. The other guy that is probably significant is defensive end Shane Ray. He was injured, had a season-ending injury, and they decided to release him with an injury settlement from IR. So he is officially off the team, I believe. And then, Kyle Salagi, former co-host of this podcast, his boy Deshaun White got released. I have no idea if he even played in that final preseason game against the Bears, but he is now officially done. So no more Deshaun White. Any thoughts on who was cut already?
I mean, you kind of pointed out the one that I was going to, which is Jay Sternberger. I still think that there's a chance they try to bring him back on the practice squad, although a little less likely because the cut was earlier. But I feel like they need a tight end on the practice squad. He could be that guy, but we'll see kind of as the next 48 hours progresses.
For sure. Yeah, so that is that. We'll address some trade rumors now. We'll get into a little bit more later, but the first thing is something that is already taking over this chat right now, and that is Christian Kirksey, who is right now I was released by the Texans and has been a starter for a couple different teams, was on the Packers, has been on the Texans, has been on the Browns. A long-time veteran of the NFL, pretty solid middle linebacker, which, in my opinion, is something that the Bills could really use right now. Writing out the roster right now and having to go to middle linebacker and being like, all right, there really aren't any answers on this team right now that I feel comfortable with. And Christian Kirksey is not necessarily like some major Pro Bowler, like why did they release him type of player at this point of his career, but I would probably, at least in a vacuum, just feel more comfortable with him as a player than the other guys on this roster right now.
I mean, the name alone, like Christian Kirksey, is somebody who was connected to the Bills a couple years ago, is a guy who's kind of done well in the league. He's getting up there in age now. I think he's over 30 at this point in time, so he's probably slowing down a bit. I'll be completely honest, I didn't remember much of Kirksey last year, so I can't comment fully on him, but I can say maybe with some degree of certainty that he's better than what we've seen in preseason from some certain Bills players. So kick the tires on Kirksey. It can't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it would surprise me if Bean was not at least involved in seeing what that would cost, what he would be able to do. Spin actually brings an interesting point to this. Kirksey went to school with Micah Hyde at Iowa and played with Poyer in Cleveland. It's an interesting little connection there, an important one to make. All it takes is the right connections when you're in this league, right? You have to know the right people. You have to be able to prove to someone that, like, hey, this is somebody we can trust. I mean, we've seen it with players on this roster, right? I mean, that's why guys like Trey White and Terrell Bernard are on this team and got drafted, because they were recommended by the right people to the right people on this staff. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I would be all into it though.
And you bring up Trey White and Terrell Bernard, like one of the biggest selling points to Sean McDermott in that the whole Bills brass was that they're high character guys, like really great people. Like Christian Kirksey, I believe last year was the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Texans. So that means something.
I'll have my producer check that.
Yeah, check that. So if that's the case, assuming that's the case, and from what I've heard, at least from the Texans fans and stuff, is that he is a huge part of that locker room. He's a good force in that locker room. So bringing in somebody that kind of fits the personality of the Bills would kind of align with what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and like he's been a captain for other teams before. Yes, he was the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Texans. So yeah, that definitely does mean a lot for a team like the Bills and the way that they do things with McDermott and being. I mean, this seems like a kind of no-brainer for both sides. I would think that if Kirksey wanted, I mean, let's be honest, going from a team like the Texans who are clearly in rebuilding mode, and it's certainly a lot more exciting than where they've been in the last couple of years, where you have like a real head coach that you're committing to long-term and a quarterback that you're committing to long-term. Certainly exciting, but also you don't need to be a part of that if you're 30 years old, right? Like if you're 30 years old, you're looking at rings to try and get before you're done with your time. So if I'm Christian Kirksey, I would love to go to a Super Bowl team like the Bills. And if I'm the Bills, I'd love to have an actual middle linebacker like Christian Kirksey. So
legitimate middle linebacker.
Somebody that you at least feel relatively comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So I would be all in on that. That is kind of the only news that we got, which means that we're going to just jump right into the roster projection. And I'll bring that up now. There we go. That actually worked. Good for me. So we have from the Bills website. So if you have any complaints, go to the Bills website. That's their fault for misleading information. But we have in front of you this very big roster, and it is time to figure out who makes it and who does not. So as you can see down here, we have our little key. The green is a lock. They're going to be on the roster. Red is a cut. Orange is who we presume would be brought back on the practice squad. We'll see what happens there. And then we'll talk about trade candidates. There's two in my mind. I'm not sure if you have the same two, but we'll figure that out. But yeah. And we will do our best to keep track with the counter here. If I forget to update it, someone just yell at me in the chat. So Spin's giving his immediate breakdown right now. Special teams 3, quarterback 2, wide receiver 6, tight end 3, O-line 9, running back 4, D-line 10, linebacker 5, safety 4, quarterback 7. We'll see. We'll see if that goes. If you are not long-time fans of the Cover 1 Roundup, or even just in the last 6 weeks or so, which why have you not been? I mean, I get it, but why? You can go back to when Kyle and I did our 53-man roster projection before training camp started. Check that out. I actually used that exact same format to come up with this format right now. So let's just jump right into it. Let's start with quarterback. Josh Allen, obvious trade candidate. No, I'm kidding. He is very obviously on this roster and will remain on this roster. So he is a lock. Is that the right green? Does that matter? Will that matter? It doesn't look right. Well, no, wait, that is it. See? There we go. Yeah. Okay, so Josh Allen, lock. Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley. So Matt Barkley currently has an injury that he suffered against the Steelers. And Kyle Allen is Kyle Allen, and he looked better against the Bears than he did in the other 2 games. Ultimately uninspiring, but also, what else are you gonna get? I mean, maybe you get a PJ Walker, but at the end of the day, it's just who fits into the quarterback room so that they can sort of help and be buddies with Josh Allen. And both Matt Barkley and Kyle Allen seem to do a good job of that, but I don't think anybody's going to want Matt Barkley. So I would say that Kyle Allen is a lock and Matt Barkley is practice squad.
Yeah, I 100% with you on that. And I do think a hard selling point for the Bills, let's say the Bills are like, hey, we want a PJ Walker, we want a Nathan Rourke, or we want one of those guys. Go into Josh and be like, hey, your buddy Kyle, we're cutting him. I feel like that's not the easiest sell where Josh could just be like, hey, I'm not going to get hurt this year. Just stick with my guy. So that for that reason, those reasons, I believe that Kyle Allen's probably QB2.
I would agree with that. So that will put us at 2. We are now 2 players on the roster.
It's also a position that doesn't particularly matter all that much, even though Twitter is going to debate it until the end of time.
Well, Twitter will debate anything until the end of time. True, so I don't really care about that. So moving on to running back, where there are a lot of names, and I would say safely assume James Cook is on this roster. I don't think there's any real debating about that. James Cook is on this roster. I feel pretty confident now that Damian Harris is also on this roster. I also feel pretty confident that Latavius Murray is probably on this roster. So that leaves us with Jordan Mims, Darrington Evans, and Ty Johnson. So Mims has been okay throughout preseason. Darrington Evans has also been pretty solid throughout preseason, but also brings value as a kick returner potentially. Mm-hmm. And then Ty Johnson, same sort. For some reason, they signed him last week, and he played fine against the Bears, but I don't necessarily see like somebody that they bring in 1 week ago making this roster definitively. Mm-hmm. So I would say at the moment, I think that Mims is probably a cut, and Evans would be a practice squad, and Ty Johnson is also a cut. That would be my initial feeling right now.
Going into preseason training camp, I thought Mims was going to be the practice squad running back, but after preseason, I'm leaning towards Darrington Evans or Ty Johnson. I actually think that, and actually wrote a post about this that just went live on Cover One. Think Ty Johnson, it can be a little bit more than what people are kind of selling him as. He's a legitimate NFL running back and has kind of put up a good amount of stats. He's appeared in close to 70 games. Like he's a legitimate NFL running back. But I really think at this point, it's between Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans. You could tell me it's one or the other. It doesn't really matter. It's one of them. But I don't think they're carrying 4 running backs on the roster on the 53.
I would agree with that. So I'm gonna put Mims as the cut, and put Evans as the practice squad guy. Would they keep 2 practice squad running backs?
No, I can't see the value. No, I can't see that.
Yeah. So Jordan Mims and Ty Johnson both cut. Darrington Evans on the practice squad. Cook, Harris, and Murray all on the active roster. We are now bringing the count up to 5. Plenty more to go. But thankfully, this one will be quick. Reggie Gilliam, fullback, on the team. He's not competing with anyone. He brings fullback and tight end versatility. This is kind of been this has been like a real like low-key great find for Brandon Beane to have someone like Reggie Gilliam that they had at tight end, and then they just like were like, hey, could you play fullback? And then it turns out he really could, and I'm just like, all right, well, you can play fullback, you've played tight end before. Well, if we need you to play tight end now that we're running a lot more 12, we'll make it work. So Reggie Gilliam on the roster. Wide receiver. This is going to take a little bit of time. So let's get what I feel to be the obvious one. So there are 4 clear and obvious names that we're going to keep on this roster. The first being Stephon Diggs, second being Gabe Davis, third being Deontay Hardy, since they signed him to a contract and paid a decent amount of money to get him. And the fourth being Trent Sherfield, just because of the value he brings inside and outside as a run blocker and on special teams. Like this is if you could make like a depth wide receiver for this particular regime, it is Trent Sherfield and no one else. 100%. Like it is, they could just like clone Trent Sherfield a couple times and be like, all right, let's fill out the roster with that. All right, here's where it gets a little dicey. So you've got Khalil Shakir, who was a 5th-round pick last year, and has been up and down, was up and down as a rookie, hasn't really shown much, has been injured, and he doesn't seem like the type of receiver that is normally on this team. And it's tricky to sort of be talented. Like, we know that Khalil Shakir is talented, and we see that. But is he the right fit for this team? I'm not 100% sure on that. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that, because you have, I think, 2 other major competitors in Andy Isabella, who they brought in like right after training camp started, along with Darrington Evans, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, I think might have been the same day.
So much happens in a month. It's ridiculous how much happens in a month and how much it all blurs together over time. But Andy Isabella, former second round pick because he's just so fast, right? Like he's got clear, easy speed. And he's got some agility to him that makes him a really intriguing player from the slot position. And we've seen him play pretty well in the preseason, and they clearly want him to do something on special teams. They've put him out at gunner. They've had him do returns. I don't know if he's necessarily going to bring any legitimate value in either of those situations. I think that if they really want to have him on this roster, they'll just have him. But I don't know if they really feel comfortable putting him on special teams as much as they would like him to be. So there's that. And then you have 5th round pick from this year, Justin Shorter, who first game didn't get targeted at all. And second and third games ends up getting a touchdown in the second game, plays decently well in the third game. This is somebody who is very physically gifted, but has never really put it together in college at any place that he went, whether it was Penn State or Florida. And based on what people have said from his coaches, like they've said that like he's physically gifted. Obviously, he shows up to practice. He's willing to do special teams. He's not like a loafer type of guy. Like this is somebody that just like has all the ability and seems to have the right work ethic. It's just like, why has this not all come together yet? So then there's also the remaining, what do we got? 4 here. Tyrell Shavers, Brian Thompson, Keyshawn Johnson, and Marcel Aitman. All have had their moments in the preseason. None of them really stand out to me, in my opinion. Any thoughts on any of these guys? Which way you're leaning right now?
Yeah, so I'll go to the 3 guys, Shorter, Isabella, and Shakir that you first mentioned, because I think those are the ones that legitimately have a shot. The other guys don't at the 53. And for 2 of those guys, you specifically mentioned special teams, which you're spot on with, Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella. Khalil Shakir is not a special teams player. He hasn't shown that he can do that in the NFL. I have no confidence that he can. And for that reason, he has so much less value as a depth piece than, say, a Justin Shorter, who in college was a very good special teams player. He's going to take some time to acclimate in the NFL, but at a minimum, his floor is playing special teams. Then you have Andy Isabella, who the Bills just, they keep finding a way for him to make the roster. Every single preseason game we've watched, it's like, all right, now go do this. Go return punts, go return kicks, go run, be the gunner, go down and punt.
And he's obviously been willing to do so, right? Like they have him. I don't know how many like 5'8" punt gunners there are in the NFL, but he's out there like trying to do it at least. Whether or not he's doing it well is a whole other story, but like the effort is clearly there.
And I did look this up after finding out like he was in punt coverage in one of the games. He does have, and I'm not 100% sure on this number, I believe he has 5 tackles on punt coverage in his NFL career, which is, it sounds like such a small number, 5. That's a big number for special teams. So he has experience that the other 2 don't have. Something about Andy Isabella, at this point, I don't think it's just, the fans being like wacky like they usually are about these practice squad or these preseason wide receivers. I think he made the roster. I think he did enough. Like, I think he's on the roster, which is crazy to me.
Okay, so we're calling
talk me
Andy. I kind of want to, but I can't. Like, it seems like the Bills want him to be on this team, and I don't think they want to just let him go. Now, granted, there is this to consider. He is a vested veteran, which means he's not subject to waivers. So if he is cut, he's not somebody that you have to worry about being claimed. It's just a matter of, will he get a better offer from someone else before you have a chance to bring him back?
Yep.
And maybe that's the case. There's 31 other teams in the NFL, and some of them have wide receiver issues. It's very possible that he just gets snagged up and somebody's willing to offer him just a little bit more money, maybe a little bit more guarantees. Maybe that's the case, but I kind of doubt it. I kind of feel like this is somebody that they are just going to say made the roster, and you know, it would be very hard pressed for me to see him cut at this point. I'm not saying it won't happen. Like I said, there's a path for him to be cut and still be on this team, but it would be tricky. It's going to be a little trickier. I think they just want to have that security of having Andy Isabella on this roster right now.
I agree. And so I think saying that, then the question I have for you. So now we're at 5. If we just
we are at 5 wide receivers with Andy Isabella.
Do you think they carry 6 or do you think they carry 7?
I'm gonna lean towards 6, and we could come back to certain positions where we have question marks. This might be one of them. I kind of feel good about calling it 6 wide receivers. They haven't. You've kind of looked more into this than I have, but I think that this is not a team that has carried a lot of wide receiver set, like 7 wide receivers a lot of the time. So you would be hard pressed to tell me now that they're going to do it just to keep Khalil Shakir on the roster.
Yeah, so you're leaning the same way I am, that I think Shorter's the guy that's staying on.
It just sort of seems like Shorter being drafted this year, being a little bit more skilled in the way that they like, and kind of potentially, if Gabe Davis walks next year in free agency, Justin Shorter has a similar skill set in terms of what he's good at and what he won in college, rather than somebody like Khalil Shakir. So for that, and especially like we said, special teams guy, it matters to the Bills. Khalil Shakir, he doesn't bring value as a returner, doesn't really do anything in coverage that stands out. So with somebody like Shorter, who has done it plenty of times in college, I just kind of feel like Shorter is going to be the guy right now. So I'm going to put him in. So then, okay. So of the remaining 5 wide receivers, you got Khalil Shakir, Tyrell Shavers, Brian Thompson, Keyshawn Johnson, Marcel Aitman. Any of them for the practice squad? Do you think Khalil Shakir goes to the practice squad? There's been somebody who is this? Spin again, just coming in. Shakir to IR. Do they put him on IR? Maybe to try and stash him there.
I think that Shakir. Here's what I think: if the Bills cut Shakir, I think he gets claimed somewhere else. And they're not going to convince him to go on IR if he thinks he can get claimed somewhere else instead of going to inevitably go into the practice squad. I also think he could have some very minimal trade value. You might be able to get a 6th-round pick, a 7th-round pick for him. I think that would be a bit of a stretch because teams might be looking at saying the Bills are going to cut him anyway. Why not just wait? I mean, they would try to get him back on the practice squad. I don't think they cut him and just be like, yeah, we're done with you. But if they're going to cut Khalil Shakir, they'll try to get him there. I just don't think he can go there. I think he get claimed.
So are we putting cut, or do you want to put trade?
You could put trade. Like, try to see what they get for him. I mean, he could also make the roster. Like he's right at the bottom of mine.
It could be very realistic, right? Where they keep Shakir on the roster because he is subject to waivers, and then cut Isabella because he's not.
You're right.
Do we flip that then?
Oh man!
Do you want to go that route?
Yeah, do that. Let's say they cut Isabella, but we both agree that the plan is to bring him back.
So we got Shakir on the roster. We're gonna put Isabella as cut. Oh, I'm gonna put an asterisk here. Andy Isabella, asterisk number 1. Brought back, not subject to.
And while you're doing this, I'll just say, like, this is not Khalil Shakir slander at all. I think he's an NFL caliber wide receiver. It's not that he isn't. It's just, what does he bring to the 2023 Bills that the other guys don't? And there's just really isn't anything. If Trent Sherfield was not on the Bills roster, I would have Khalil Shakir as a borderline lock, but Sherfield just does so much more and has shown so much more in his NFL career that he kind of makes Shakir a redundant piece that I don't know where I don't know where he fits in Buffalo, but I know he fits in the NFL, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. Like we've seen enough of Khalil Shakir where it's like he could make another roster and do well on those rosters. It's just a matter of when you are not one of the top 3 or 4 guys, you got to be able to bring something else other than your ability on offense. And if you can't, it's a hard sell to keep you on this team. So that's sort of the thought process there. As far as Tyrell Shavers, Brian Thompson, Keyshawn, Marcel Aitman, practice squad for any of them? Anyone stick out of that group?
I'm pretty confident in Tyrell Shavers being a practice squad guy. He's got some upside as a wide receiver, and I'm going to say this a billion times tonight, I feel like he's a special teams ace. Like he was a great special teams player in college. The Bills covet that. They see a path for him maybe in the future and being a part of this roster. So I think Tyrell Shavers, they're going to put him on the practice squad and no worries about anyone claiming him.
For sure. Brian Thompson, Keyshawn Johnson, Marcel Aitman, cuts.
Yeah, most likely all of them cut. I could see Keyshawn Johnson being kind of stored on the Bills practice squad, but not 100% on that. He does have some pro experience. He played for, I believe, the Cardinals for a couple of years. So they might be interested in the vet, but yeah, you could tell me that he's being cut or any of the other 3 are being cut.
Fair enough. So that is going to add 6 to the roster, right? If I'm doing the math correctly. I am not doing the math correctly because I forgot to add Reggie Gilliam. So let's see, we got 5, 6 plus 6, so 12. We're now at 12 players on this roster. It gets eaten up pretty quickly. Getting to 53, you start at 2 at quarterback. You're like, oh, there's plenty of room on this team. It gets filled pretty quickly. All right, tight end. So I feel like this is pretty easy. I feel like Knox, Kincaid, and Morris all make the roster, and Joel Wilson doesn't.
Yes, that's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Do you think Wilson would be a practice squad guy? Do you think they look into free agency? I mean, Dan Arnold got cut by the Eagles recently. That could be an option that they bring in, as opposed to a Joel Wilson who hasn't really done anything in the NFL, as far as I know.
I would say that there's going to be a tight end on the practice squad. I don't think it's going to be Joel Wilson.
Okay, I think that's also pretty accurate. It's just. He had 1 catch in that Bears game, if I remember correctly.
I think on the right side of the field or something.
Yeah. It's just, this is somebody who just hasn't had a ton of opportunities. I don't know. It's just, it doesn't make a whole ton of sense to use even a practice squad spot on somebody that you're just not that confident in. Spin, again, talking about Sternberger practice squad, maybe. Maybe, but and I liked Sternberger when he came out of college at Texas A&M. I thought he was really great. I was kind of annoyed that the Bills didn't take him in the draft in that season, but he did not necessarily show me anything in the preseason that made me feel like this is somebody that needs to be on the practice squad. This is somebody that the Bills need to find a way to keep. It is what it is. If they bring him back, fine, but I don't necessarily care all that much. I think honestly. Him getting cut early, like on that first wave of cuts, is probably a good indicator that he's not long for this team.
He had that bad fumble too, which I think McDermott doesn't. He does not like fumbles.
No. Most coaches don't. I've heard that about them.
It's just a good point. Unless you're Josh Allen, then you fumble all you want. And you just pretend like it doesn't happen.
That's right. It's like Jimmy Johnson when he was with the Cowboys. If somebody asked him after he cut a player for falling asleep in a meeting, and somebody asked him well, what would happen if Troy Aikman fell asleep in a meeting? He's like, I'd go over to Troy and I'd say, hey buddy, wake up.
Yeah. So treated a
little you get away with things when you're a talented person. That's unfortunately a rule of life. So moving on to offensive tackle. Actually, let's update the counter before I forget. Again, we are now at 15. So we've got at left tackle, Deion Dawkins. At right tackle, Spencer Brown. Depth behind them is Ryan Van DeMark, David Questenberry, Richard Garage, and Alec Anderson. So Dawkins and Brown, both locks. And behind them is where things get really interesting, because David Questenberry was on this roster last year and did not play all that well when he had to come in for Spencer Brown. Ryan Van DeMark has been pretty solid throughout this whole preseason and has played left tackle, I believe, right? Yeah. And Garage has also been pretty interesting throughout the preseason. And Alec Anderson has played tackle and is listed as a tackle, but he's taken snaps at center as well. And given how much this team knows that, like, someone like Mitch Morse, who's had injury issues in the past with concussions, I mean, there's a reason to want potentially somebody to be a backup center, right? Because then they clearly have Ryan Bates to be the backup center and the backup guard, and he'll probably end up getting thrust in with Connor McGovern's injury if he has to, get switched around, or if Torrance goes, whatever. This is why you have Ryan Bates. But if Ryan Bates is in there, you need someone else behind him too. You can't just get into the middle of the season and be like, hey, if Ryan Bates goes down, we don't have someone who can snap the ball. You need somebody there. And I think that really feels to me that Alec Anderson is closer to a lock on this roster than maybe we originally anticipated coming into the season.
The Alec Anderson playing snaps at center is what changed it for me. If he's playing, he literally played snaps at center, you make a very important point. The Bills know that Mitch Morse can play center. They know that Ryan Bates can play center. But last year, they specifically also rostered Greg Van Roten because Greg Van Roten could play guard, but he could also play center. So if your two centers go down, at least you got a third that can play. Alec Anderson is the only other guy in the entire Bills roster I know of that they're trying to make play center. So I feel like that alone kind of gives him an edge over somebody like David Questenberry. I don't know. I've been back and forth with Alec Anderson and David Questenberry. I think it's Alec Anderson now that's making the roster.
I think that's fair. McGovern can play center. I think that's true, but we also don't know the extent of his injury at the moment. True. So it's hard to say when he would be available. And, your best ability is availability in the NFL and in life in general. Okay, so how do we feel about David Questenberry? Do we feel like he's going to make this roster? Do we feel like he's a cut candidate?
Because I think Alec Anderson's making it, and Ryan Van DeMark has so much smoke around him. There's just smoke everywhere. All the reporters are talking about him. Everyone seems really high on him. I think that Van DeMark and Alec Anderson both make it and Quest is gone, which is kind of surprising to me because I thought he was, coming into the offseason, he was the backup again for both tackles, but those two youngins might have beaten him out.
Okay, so we're going to put Van DeMark and Alec Anderson as locks to make this roster.
I think so.
So Questenberry will call a cut. Is it possible he comes back as a practice squad guy? Because the rules have changed now where veterans can be on the practice squad. So is he a practice squad guy? Do you feel like another team picks him up as depth?
Again, this is similar to the Shakir conversation, right? The Bills, if they cut Questenberry, they want him on the practice squad. Does that mean that he's going to be willing to go there or another team won't pick him up? I'm not sure, but I would say for this exercise, let's presume the Bills, that's where they're trying to get him to. And if they can get him there, that'd be great. Having Questenberry on your practice squad would be a really good backup plan.
Okay. So let's put Questenberry as practice squad. Beta Jim 22. Best ability is availability in life. Why am I getting attacked here? I don't know why you're getting attacked here. I don't know your story, man. Good luck in whatever's going on in your life. Sounds rough right now. Okay, so Richard Garage. Richard Garage is the wild card here. It seems like he seems to be, again, this is somebody who's played fairly well in the preseason. And do you feel like he's going to be available if they cut him and subject him to waivers? Do you think he gets claimed by another team?
I'd be surprised if he got claimed. He was an undrafted free agent for a reason. All 32 teams had a chance to get him and no one did. And he came to Buffalo. And also he signed with the Bills as an undrafted free agent, which is saying something because I don't think his path was that easy compared to some other teams he could have gone to. So he came to Buffalo probably because he didn't have as much interest elsewhere as maybe we think. He might have played himself onto a roster somewhere, but I think that they probably could get him to practice squad if they wanted to. I just don't know if there's a spot for him. If Vandemark and Alec Anderson are making it, I think we're both going to have 5 interior linemen basically as locks right away. Like, are the Bills then going to carry, what would that be, 10 offensive linemen? I don't know if they carry 10.
So you're now, I'm going to call you this. You're now the practice squad expert because you wrote an entire freaking article about it.
I did, yeah.
So right now we've got 4 guys on the practice squad and we haven't touched defense at all. Mm-hmm. So do you feel like having 5 guys on the practice squad just from offense, from what we have right now, and this could certainly change, do you think that that's a reasonable thing? Do you feel like that's too many on that side of the ball?
Yeah. So in that write-up, which you can go to Cover One right now and read it, there's 8 players from offense that I have making the practice squad. There's 16 spots now. I don't think it's unreasonable to have we'd be at 5 with Garage. I don't think that's unreasonable. Yeah.
So I'm going to put Garage's practice squad with the caveat that, like, it's very possible that he does not stay. Like, he could get claimed in waivers. He's available as that. We'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting. But I feel pretty confident. Obviously, Dawkins and Brown, Vandemark as well, and Alec Anderson. It's Questenberry and Garage where I'm like, maybe, probably not. But if they can bring him back on the practice squad, I think both of those would be very welcome additions for both.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we are going to update the counter. We are now at 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're at 19 players on the roster right now. Moving on to guard. I feel confident in both Connor McGovern, even though he's currently injured. He'll be on the team. We also have second-round pick Osiris Torrance making the team. I also feel pretty confident in David Edwards making the team with Connor McGovern's injury. He was the one who started for him against the Bears, so I feel pretty confident with him. Nick Broker has played, especially for a 7th-round pick, not bad for this team. Do you feel confident in him making the roster as opposed to maybe trying to sneak him onto the practice squad?
I personally don't see him making the roster.
Okay.
I think he's a guy that I'd love to get on the practice squad this year. Let him be there for a year, and then next year take David Edwards' spot. But I don't think this is the year for him to be on the roster.
So we're going to optimistically put Nick Broker as a practice squad guy. Kevin Jarvis, Greg Mance, and Ike Butker. Do you feel like let's start with Ike Butker, right? He's been on this team for a while. He was a big Bobby Johnson guy, right? Like former offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. This was somebody that was a big fan of Ike Butker and used him as teaching tape for his offensive line clinics. Like, this is somebody that is a big proponent of Ike Butker. Well, Bobby Johnson is obviously no longer on this team. He's currently the offensive line coach for the Giants. And the Giants could probably use somebody like Ike Butker just as depth, because pretty much every team in the NFL could use O-line depth. Do you feel like Ike Butker is one of these, day 3 pick guy trade candidates that Brandon Bean likes to do at the end of preseason?
I mean, I'll say that I think Bucker has looked pretty rough this preseason, which is kind of upsetting because there was a point in time where he was a pretty good depth piece for the Bills, and then injuries have kind of derailed that. But I wouldn't put anything past Brandon Bean. He got a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick for Russell Bodine. So yeah,
and a 7th for Marshall Newhouse.
Yeah, it's a really good point though. You have the Bucker to the Giants.
This was something that Kyle and I discussed on the first roster projection, that Bucker is a trade candidate really for the Giants. I feel like if there's a place where Bucker could go, and if we're going to talk about somebody who might be, able to be traded, I mean, Brandon Bean has traded a lot of offensive linemen at this time of year, whether it was the aforementioned Russell Bodine and Marshall Newhouse, or Cody Ford last year, or obviously Wyatt Teller to the Browns a couple of years ago. Like, this is the time of year where Brandon Bean makes a move like this. And it's often with offensive linemen because he knows some team in the NFL is looking at their offensive line chart and going, oh, God, what do we do here? And maybe that's the Giants. I don't think the Giants are quite as woeful in that as some other teams are. But I think that seems like the most obvious candidate to me.
I mean, I just pulled up the Giants depth chart because I was like, I don't even know who they have at guard, and it's pretty slim pickings. They got Ben Bredesen is their left guard, Mike Lewinsky is their right guard. Those are the penciled in starters, and then their backups: Shane Lemieux and Joshua Izudu. So can Mike Bucker beat out Shane Lemieux?
I don't even know who Izudu is. I remember Shane Lemieux when he came out of Oregon, but I think it's possible. So I'm gonna call Ike Bucker a trade candidate. I don't know if it happens. It probably doesn't, but we're gonna call it a trade candidate. That's right. Kevin Jarvis and Greg Mance. Cuts, practice squad for either of them. Feel strongly either way.
I think they're both cuts. Maybe Jarvis has a path. I don't think Manx really does. There's a reason. Again, Alec Anderson playing center. To me, that tells me that's where they see that they don't need the center on the practice squad.
That's probably fair. All right, so we've got 3 guys making the roster. We've got 1 on the practice squad, 2 cuts, and 1 trade candidate. So moving on, we are now up to 22 players on the roster. To center. Again, this feels like it's going to be pretty quick. I think both Mitch Morse and Ryan Bates make this roster.
Yes.
We've talked about both enough. Mitch Morse is obviously the starter. They love Mitch Morse. Ryan Bates, they obviously love Ryan Bates as well. They see him more in that backup center role, backup swing guard role. So I think that these are 2 pretty easy keeps for this team. So I feel pretty confident in that. All right. We're all the way through offense with 24 players right now. We are pretty much where we should be. I will take this time, though, to just pencil in right off the bat. These 3 are special teams guys. Tyler Bass, Sam Martin, and Reed Ferguson. There's no competition there. No one's going to care. I will say something that was brought up in the Cover One group chat one day was Reed Ferguson potentially being a cut candidate, not to not make the roster, but to essentially, keep a spot open so that they can bring someone else in and then, do some little roster retooling and then re-sign him, give him some extra guarantees. Again, he's not subject to waivers. He's been on this team for a long, long time. It's not like some other team's going to offer a 34-year-old long snapper like, oh, we got to really get Reed Ferguson right now. But if you're in a situation where, hey, maybe you want to keep Andy Isabella on this roster and not have anyone else offer him any money and to go anywhere else, maybe you're like, hey, Reed Ferguson, we're going to cut you, stay out in the parking lot. We'll bring you back in the next day. Like that's what I would call that. So I'm gonna put double asterisk here.
And even in the theoretical world where the Bills did this and some team came in and was like, hey, Reed, we're going to offer you an extra couple $100,000. I honestly think he'd be like, nah, I'm good. Like,
Right.
I'm
I
set
mean,
up
like
in Buffalo. I've been here. Like,
he's been on this team for a long time now, and
yeah.
like they clearly love him. They like working with him. He seems to like both Sam Martin and Tyler Bass. Like, there's no reason that he would leave. I don't really see that happening. So we're gonna move on to hold on. Let's add 3 more to count. We're now up to 27 on the roster. Let's see. Spin, Dave, you are wrong. You don't cut Ferguson to save Isabella because Isabella won't be eligible to go on to IR. So sure, I guess. But also like I'm just really just using Isabella as like an example, not saying like not trying to very specifically like cut Ferguson to keep Isabella. It's more just an example.
He's the guy. He's the guy. What you're saying, he's the guy you want to protect. And
right.
you basically put Reed Ferguson in the parking lot to say to Balin Spector, like, hey, you're going to go to IR now.
Right.
But we're not putting Andy Isabella away as a risk. Like,
right.
Reed isn't a risk.
Right. It could be Isabella. It could be Shakira. It could be Balin Spector, like you just said. Like I just brought up Andy Isabella just because we had already talked about him. So there you go. Anyway, so moving on to defense. We're going to start defensive tackle. I feel pretty confident in 3 players being locks to make the roster, and I would say that's Ed Oliver, obviously. Big contract. Looking forward to seeing what he does now. Daquan Jones. They love Daquan Jones, and they should love Daquan Jones. He's awesome. And I feel like Poona Ford is on this roster.
Yes.
Yeah.
They better not cut Poona Ford. They better not.
If we went through this whole offseason of Greg wanting desperately to have Poona Ford on this team, they finally sign him, and then he doesn't make this team. That I don't want to call that the worst part of this offseason, but it's going to be up there.
There's been so many bad parts of this offseason. It needs to be over now.
Okay, so let's get into some of the more interesting parts here. So Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle, right? Now, they signed Tim Settle last year to a 2-year deal. Pretty decent money, but nothing all that spectacular. But they felt like his performance in 2022 merited the Bills saying, hey, if you want to be on this team, you're going to have to take a pay cut, which he did. And that kind of says something. And it also kind of seems like because of that, since they've already asked him to take a pay cut, it seems like they wouldn't just boot him to the curb at the end of August, right? Like, I don't necessarily see that happening. And with Jordan Phillips, I mean, I think they would like to have him on this team. I imagine that they do. But it's going to be tough to make me, maybe this is just me, but I don't necessarily feel confident in Jordan Phillips being like available all these games because he so rarely is. I mean, he has an injury history, whether it was with the Bills or with Arizona. I'm going to call Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle both locks, though. I would say that they're both going to make this roster.
Yeah, I have them both on mine. Tim Settle, like, it costs the Bills money to cut him. His dead cap's higher than his contract. So that alone, like, he's talented enough to be a reserve defensive tackle on an NFL roster. And Jordan Phillips, when he's healthy, still is playing really good football. So the two of them combined for a single player in my head, they keep both of them on the roster.
For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. As far as the rest of these guys go, Kendall Vickers, DJ Dale, Eli Anko. I feel like Eli Anko is a practice squad lock. Like, if they can get him on the practice squad, they're going to get him on the practice squad. So I'm going to mark him down there. He's been on the active roster before. He's been in games before, and like for a practice squad type of guy, has played decently well. So I feel pretty confident in that. Kendall Vickers and DJ Dale. Any strong feelings about either of them?
DJ Dale is interesting to me. He's a little undersized, but he comes out of Alabama where he was pretty good in college. Like,
Mm.
I think DJ Dale is a good young prospect as a defensive tackle to put on the practice squad, especially because the Bills have a single defensive tackle under contract next year, and that's at Oliver. They have no one else. So get a young guy, see if you can't develop him. Maybe DJ Dale's that guy.
So you feel like if they can get him on the practice squad, they're gonna try
Yeah.
and do it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll mark him as practice squad guy. Kendall Vickers will call a cut.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defensive tackles, 5 interior D linemen. So now we're up to 32. Eli Anko and DJ Dale to the practice squad. Kendall Vickers is cut. Defensive end. This is where things get really dicey. Because the first 2 are pretty obvious, right? Like I would even say the first 4 are pretty obvious. I think that Greg Rousseau, Von Miller, AJ Epinesa, Leonard Floyd, all on this roster. Feel pretty solid saying that. So we're gonna put them in now. So here's the tricky part, right? Von Miller, is he? I would assume he's on the PUP list or short-term IR. So I'm gonna have. I don't know if you know the difference between the two. I couldn't necessarily explain it, but as far as rostering things goes, the difference between PUP and like short-term IR, what would be the main difference here?
Yeah, I mean, both of them confuse me. I don't want to say something wrong and how it works, but eventually when the Bills get him to however they're going to classify him, right? He's not going to count for a roster spot. That's what they're going to do. So I think he's not going to play till week 6, let's say at the earliest. I think you could keep him in green, and then just when that number hits 54, Von Miller's that spot. Like Von Miller's 54 when he's really 53. So in the meantime, we can play with 53 people. He's not going to play week 1. I know people have this hope in their head that he's going to. I just truly believe there's basically like a 1% chance he plays week 1. I think that's being generous.
This very short article that I'm looking at from Marca.com, which is the first time I've ever heard of this site. So interesting. PUP, you are on the roster, and then they are not eligible to play until week 7 of the regular season.
Yeah.
And once players on the PUP list are prohibited from practicing or participating in practices and games for the first 6 weeks of the regular season. Teams have 21 days to decide whether to practice throughout that additional 6-week window. If they want to do so, activate the player and add him to the 5th 3-man roster, waive or release the player, or take no action and maintain his PUP status. And I'm now getting information. PUP is now up to week 4. So actually, let's just have Beta Jim explain it to us. He clearly knows. PUP doesn't need to make original roster and can't bypass this at any point. Short-term IR has to make the 53 first, then placed on IR. Okay.
So that's what I was going to say, but I didn't want to get it. I didn't want to have it backwards. Yeah. So the Bills are going to put him on the PUP list essentially. So this is where we talk about the parking lot thing, right? Like if they don't want to put him on the PUP, then you tell Reed Ferguson to go stand by his car for a minute. Then you put Von on IR. Then tell Reed he can come back inside.
That makes sense. So we'll triple asterisk Von. There you go. And this will be a little bit shorter, thankfully. PUP. So that makes sense. Okay, so Von Miller, PUP, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Leonard Floyd. That all tracks to me. Yeah. Here's where things get a little tricky. They have 4 other guys left, and I would really only want to keep 2 of them. So I like Kingsley Jonathan. He played fairly well for them last year at the end of the season when he got called up. He's been really good throughout this preseason. If you follow Anthony Prohaska on Twitter, you've seen him tweet about Kingsley Jonathan pretty much every week of the preseason, with good reason, because he is really good for what he is. He's been really, really good. And I think we were talking about defensive line depth to have someone like that available is pretty significant. So I would think that the Bills try their best to get him on this roster and not subject him to waivers, because he is waiver eligible, I believe. And he's been really good in this preseason. I would really hate for him to get snatched up by some other team at this point.
And the funny thing is, he got snatched up last year by the Bears. Like
Right.
the Bills tried to put him on the practice squad. The Bears said, we'll take him. Eventually cut him, and he came back to Buffalo. But
and then played against
still
the Bears.
Yeah, true. But he's looked really good. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely, it's in those conversations with those three, Boogie and Shaq, Kingsley's right there.
Yeah, I mean, and with Shaq, I mean, this is somebody that obviously has been on this team before, left, and then came back. I think that, and again, Shaq has also played pretty well in the preseason. We all know what Shaq Lawson is at this point. There's no like, oh, well, what are we really going to get from Shaq Lawson? We know what Shaq Lawson is. The real question is, do you keep him on this roster knowing that, like, this dude has been to other teams before and nobody kept him, right? Like, he signed a decent contract with the Dolphins when he left the first time, got traded to the Texans, went to the Jets. None of these teams ended up keeping him for very long. All of them that didn't really seem to find any value in Shaq Lawson, which is odd to me because I think he's a decent defensive end in the NFL. I just don't know if another NFL team is going to just snatch him up. And again, this is somebody who is not going to be subjected to waivers. So maybe this is another guy that you try to, hope comes back and maybe you cut him to try and get somebody else on this roster. But again, who are you doing that for, right? Because let's set aside Lawson for a second and let's talk about Boogie Basham. What are we doing with Boogie Basham? Because I don't want him on this team at this point.
He played with the ones on Saturday,
Saturday. He did play with the ones.
So I don't remember who said it on Twitter, but the speculation makes sense. Were the Bills playing him with the ones as a showcase of what Boogie Basham is? Maybe somebody else wants him. I feel like the Bills want Boogie Basham. I think a lot of the fans are about done with him. I don't even really know where I stand with him. He's odd, and he's now like they're making him this hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle, which I don't think he is, and it just seems like a bit of a mess with Boogie Basham right now.
It just there's nothing about him that excites me. There's no way that I feel like, oh right, like this is how Boogie Basham wins in the NFL. Like it's just like I don't think he's a great run defender. I don't think he's all that strong. I don't think he's all that athletic or agile. What exactly am I getting from Boogie Basham that I'm not getting from somebody like Kingsley Jonathan, quite frankly, or Shaq Lawson? So why am I keeping him on this team when like he just doesn't move the needle at all? Like if he's on this team, I don't find him contributing to this team in a significant way at all. And if that's the case, then just cut him or see if he can be used as trade bait, right? Like we just said, like if he ran with the ones and we feel like that was more of a showcase, which they've done before, right? Like that was what they did with Sammy Watkins their first year. Was they just played him in week one. It was like, Tyrod, throw the ball at Sammy as much as you possibly can. We need to trade him. Like, if that's what they're trying to do, then so be it. But also, who is trading for Boogie Basham?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Who's giving assets for Boogie Basham at this point in their lives? I mean, I could have said the same thing about Russell Bodine, but like, at least Russell Bodine could snap a ball. Like, I don't know what Boogie Basham brings to a football team.
And here's the funny thing with this conversation, right? So we got these three defensive ends. Let's say we pick two of them. So let's say for the sake of it, Boogie's out, whether it's a trade or a cut, and we say we're going to take Kingsley Jonathan and Shaq Lawson. Now let's fast forward into, let's say, around week 5, week 6, when Von Miller needs to come back. Someone either is hurt or someone's getting cut. Like they're not carrying 6 defensive ends. So to me, I kind of have to rank the 3 and say, what order do I want them in? You've actually just in your conversation, what you just your monologue here. You've now Kingsley Jonathan's the guy I want now. Before it was not. So I go Kingsley, then I go Boogie, then I go Shaq. And I don't go that order because I think Shaq's necessarily worse than Boogie. I just, like you said, I know what Shaq Lawson is. I know what he is. Yeah. There's still some hope in my head that maybe there's some untapped potential within Boogie. Like the floor is the floor. I've seen the floor. Maybe there's more. I doubt it. But Shaq, the other thing with him, where's he going to go? I know that might sound bad, but like he has more value to the Bills than he does to any other team, and his value with the Bills isn't that high. Like no one else is going to really pick him up, I don't think.
Okay, so we're going to call Kingsley Jonathan a roster lock. We're gonna say that the Bills by this time tomorrow have not cut or done any sort of weird roster manipulation, and Kingsley Jonathan is making this team. All right. And then we're going to say Boogie Basham is also making this team.
Not trade him.
We're gonna
trade him and put Shaq in. Trade him and put Shaq in.
Fair enough. I'm all for that. Hey, if you can get something for Boogie Basham, go for it. In my opinion, it's not worth it, man. I don't get it. It's rough. I don't like watching him at this point. Cameron Klein.
I think he's practice. I think he's practice squad. Okay. Just like Alec Anderson, there's a ton of smoke around Cameron Klein. I don't think enough to say he makes the squad, but I think, or to make the 53, but I think he does make this practice squad.
Okay, so we're adding 6 to this roster counter. So we are now at 38. Running out of spots. So we're gonna go to middle linebacker. Which obviously very easy, cut and dry, no murkiness or muddiness here at all. That is pure sarcasm, by the way. This is probably the most difficult part of this whole roster construction because I have Terrell Bernard as the starter. It's hard to call him the starter when he hasn't started at all, not even in the preseason, because he hasn't done anything because he had a hamstring injury. And I think that, he was warming up on Saturday, right? So that makes me feel like, okay, he's on his way back, and they just didn't want to, re-aggravate something in a preseason game, which makes sense. I think that's fine. And with them now, like, a little less than 2 weeks out from their first game, feel pretty confident that he will be totally available, ready to go for that Jets game. So Terrell Bernard, we're calling on the roster. Like, I don't think that's an argument. Here's where things get a little tricky. So you have AJ Klein, who's been on this team, he's been off this team, he's on the team again. I feel way more comfortable having AJ Klein on this team as a backup Mike linebacker than I do Tyrell Dodson at this point. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because the Bills, for some reason, decided to give $2 million of guaranteed money to Tyrell Dodson, which never made sense to begin with and makes even less sense now and just looks like a really dumb, bad decision by Brandon Beane and the Bills. But, I mean, I said this in my recap where I talked about the Mike linebacker position. I said, it would not surprise me if Tyrell Dodson is the starting middle linebacker against the Jets in week 1. It would also not surprise me if he's cut by Tuesday. Like, it sucks. This is what happens when you just sort of ignore this problem and just sort of hope that something comes out of this weird, strange cadre of nobodies or unknowns. I don't know what to do with this. Like, I'm gonna call AJ Klein on the roster because I think that he is the most like certain player, like the player where you're just like, okay, we know what AJ Klein is. Bare minimum, we can work with that during the regular season. So I'm going to call AJ Klein on this roster. Now, of course, all of this might not matter because maybe they sign Christian Kirksey at some point. I'm not exactly banking on them to do that. But I would really like for them to do that. So I think that we'll call Terrell Bernard and AJ Klein roster locks. Bale Inspector, where do we feel about him? Somebody suggested IR for him.
Yeah, they said that now they're saying it's a couple week injury that he's dealing with. So this might, we go and talk about the parking lot thing again. It might be to protect Bale Inspector and get him onto IR because of his hamstring injury. I think that's where he's ultimately going is IR. But it's going to be weird with him. He hasn't been inspiring this preseason either.
I mean, that's fair. He also hasn't played as much because of this injury, so it's hard to get a gauge on that. But he was a special teamer last year. Yeah. Obviously, that matters for this team. So I'm going to make quad asterisk Bale Inspector IR. 2, 3, 4. So do I need another color for that? Nah, we'll just leave it like that.
Yeah,
for now. If somebody in the chat wants to make a color for IR, please go ahead. But I don't feel like doing it right now. So Tyrell Dodson, where are we at? Do we want to cut him? I mean, I know we want to cut him, but like, is this a realistic scenario where they keep Terrell Bernard, AJ Klein, and then cut Tyrell Dodson?
He looked really bad against the Bears. Legitimately really bad. He can't break down to make a tackle. He gets eaten up by any blocker. He doesn't drop into his zone coverages at all. He just looks really bad. Bills cut him, save $2 million, or not. Don't save any money. They lose $2 million.
Right.
Yeah. He's this year's OJ Howard.
OJ.
That's what he is.
Yeah. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting from Tyrell Dodson right now. It's just that they're kind of stupid. And here's the thing, right? Like there were the 2 days in a row where there were fights with the Bills.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Tyrell Dodson was right in the middle of those. And you've got friggin' Isaiah McKenzie on Twitter being like, beat his ass, Deion. You have somebody who is not on this team anymore, fully supporting another player, just going after this guy. And who can blame him? I don't really. I've never understood what the Bills see in Tyrell Dodson, and I'm at this point I'm just going to call him a cut candidate, just because I don't want him on this team. I really don't. It's exhausting. All right, so Mike linebacker, we're calling 2 players, bringing us to a total of 40 right now. Weak side linebacker. I feel like this is also pretty easy. I think Milano, Dorian Williams, and Tyler Matakevich all make this roster.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to put all 3 in green. Traven Howard, practice squad, feels like.
I mean, I think he's looked decent. The Bills probably use a linebacker in the practice squad, so I'd put him there. Yeah.
All right, let's go practice squad.
And then also Tyler Matakevich is just a linebacker. I don't, when I make depth charts, I don't put him as a linebacker. I put him as a special teams player. I'm not giving him that title anymore.
Right. That's fair. He knows what he is at this point of his career, and we know what he is at this point of his career. So I think that's all fair. All right, so we're now at 43. There are 10 spots available to give away for roster spots on this team, and it's going to get a little tricky. So we're gonna start with, we're gonna go to corner, and I'm gonna include Taron Johnson in this because Taron Johnson has his own spot. So I'm gonna call Trey White, Christian Benford, and Taron Johnson all locks, along with Dane Jackson.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable with all that? Yeah.
100% agree with you.
Yeah. And now we're going to get into some of the difficult parts. So, first thing, let's talk about Kaiir Elam. Do you feel like Kaiir Elam is a legitimate trade candidate right now?
I think the Bills could legitimately trade him for something. Will they do that? I'm not as sure. But it's pretty clear in the preseason that he's third behind Dane Jackson and Christian Benford. Yes. And at that point, it becomes a situation where it's like, well, what's he doing on this roster? Like, what are we doing with him? And that's not saying he can't ever become the corner that we all wanted the first round pick to be, but Right now, he can't beat out Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, which I think says more about Benford and Dane than it does about Elam.
I think that's fair. I get that. I would also say that it's important to remember that Dane Jackson is only on a 1-year deal. And Benford and Elam are both still on their rookie deals. They will have 2 more years after 2023. So I think that it's a realistic possibility after 2023, whatever happens, that Dane Jackson walks and goes somewhere else and kind of signs like a Levi Wallace type of contract. And, some other team is going to like Dane Jackson, and they should. He's a perfectly serviceable, legitimately fine player. So then, in 2024, you have a competition between 2 guys who are like, Benford probably right now fits better for what this defense wants to do. Whereas Elam is more talented probably, but is not a fit for what they want to do. He's a sticky man-to-man coverage corner, and that's not been what this defense is about. Like, it kind of brings you into question, like, why did they take someone if they just weren't going to play him to his strength? But that's a whole other conversation for a separate time. We're talking about this year. And I think that you talk about, like, you mentioned, like, what is Kaiir Elam going to contribute to this team if he's going to be the 3rd corner behind, or really the 4th corner, right? Or the 3rd CB2, let's call it. Yeah. My question is, what are you getting out of Kaiir Elam if he's not on the roster and you've traded him? Like, to me, you have to make like a pretty decent trade offer in my mind in order to get Kaiir Elam off this team. Or, hey, if you got a nice Mike linebacker that you don't want, like, I'll take him. Like, if the Saints want to give up Demario Davis for some reason,
that's a good point.
Which I don't think would actually happen. I don't want to put that out there as something that I think would actually happen. But I don't necessarily see Kaiir Elam as a legitimate trade candidate unless the Bills just get a really big offer, like probably what would probably be considered an unreasonable offer.
Yeah, it'd have to be a day two pick. Or it would have, like you said, a starting middle linebacker. Like if the Bears called and said, "Hey, we'll give you Jack Sanborn for Kaiir Elam," I'm making that trade, but I also love 100%. Jack Sanborn, so that's a whole nother thing. The other one I've kind of floated a little bit is, would you do Kaiir Elam for Kelvin Beachum? Right tackle from the Cardinals. Just for people that don't know.
No, that's fair.
I know you know,
I would probably want like a pick from the Cardinals as well to go with that. And I will say this, having watched a lot of Eagles games last year, I know what type of defense that Jonathan Gannon runs. And if you think Kaiir Elam is not a fit for McDermott's defense, he's not a fit for Jonathan Gannon's defense. That's for sure. So I don't know how realistic that is in a vacuum. Sure, I'd like to see like a, maybe a 4th round pick in Kelvin Beachum for Kaiir Elam. I'd be okay with that. I just don't think that's actually happening.
Yeah, I don't think that the trade's going to. I think Elam's going to be on this roster week 1. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of this exercise, that's probably where we should go. Okay. I just think that there's some legitimate questions that should be asked about him now, and I think a lot of times the way I talk about it on Twitter and Reddit and things, people misinterpret. So just to say real quickly, like I think Dane Jackson has the highest floor, lowest ceiling out of the 3. I think that Christian Benford has the 2nd highest floor and 2nd highest ceiling. I think Kaiir Elam has the lowest floor and highest ceiling, if that makes sense. So
no, I would totally agree with all that.
So if Elam can ever reach that ceiling, he's by far and away the best option. It's just he's so much closer to his floor right now than his ceiling. And Dane Jackson, right at this moment in time, is a better corner than him, at least in this system.
Yeah,
which is frustrating.
It is, but it is what it is at this point. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna call Trey White, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, Kyer Elam, all locks to make the roster right now. Which now leads to the depth guys. So you have Saron Neal. I feel pretty confident in him making this roster. Special teams ace. They love him. Also, I don't know if this is just me. I feel like this has been Saron Neal's best preseason as a defensive player.
He's looked great. Like legitimately really good. Yeah.
He looks like way better at corner than I've ever seen him before. Like he's making plays on the ball. Like he doesn't look just sort of like out of position. Like a good showing from Saron Neal in the preseason. Really good for him. Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram, Kyron Brown, Alex Austin. I feel confident saying Alex Austin is a practice squad guy. I don't know. Yep. I don't think any other team is going to like snatch up Alex Austin at this point in time. So I'll call Alex Austin a practice squad guy. Jamarcus Ingram, I also feel like is a practice squad guy.
He's my number one out of the guys making the practice one. He's my number. Yeah, I think he's looked real good this preseason. He played decently well for the Bills when he had to come in against the Dolphins last year when we had everyone hurt in the DB room. I think Jamarcus Ingram, he's the one I'm concerned is going to get claimed, but the Bills are going to try to get him on practice squad for sure.
Sure. Kyron Brown, any feelings, thoughts?
I think he's cut.
Yeah, that's fair. Which leaves us with one final person to talk about, and that is Cam Lewis, who has been on and off this team for a long time and has played different roles for this team, right? Like he was sort of a backup nickel initially. Then last year they had him play safety against the Vikings and actually played. To be honest, Cam Lewis played decently well in that game. It's just that the only thing anybody will ever remember him for is that stupid Justin Jefferson catch, which is unfortunate because he really did play perfectly fine in that game. But this team clearly likes Cam Lewis, and they love positional versatility, and they feel like they have something with that with Cam Lewis. But we're running out of spots here, right? Like this is where the rubber really hits the road and you really have to make tough decisions. So do you feel like Cam Lewis is going to make this roster?
So what you said about Saron Neal has kind of been where I'm going with the Cam Lewis conversation. Is Saron Neal's looked legitimately good this preseason, better than I've ever seen him. You add to that a guy we're going to talk about in a minute in Taylor Rapp, and that positional flexibility that Cam Lewis has, it's all wonderful and stuff. But I'd rather have Taylor Rapp on the field than Cam Lewis in basically every situation. I'd rather have Saron Neal almost at this point on the field more than Cam Lewis. It's Cam is a 50-50 to me. I could see him make the roster. I could see them trying to stash him on the practice squad. But they want to keep him in Buffalo, essentially.
Well, and here's the thing, right? Like he's had like chances to be claimed by other teams or go to other teams, and he hasn't. Yep. Whereas somebody like, and we'll get to him in just a minute, Dean Marlowe, right, was claimed by the Falcons last year. And then the Bills had to trade for him in order to get him back on the team when they were losing players at safety. So I think for me, Cam Lewis, I'm going to call a practice squad guy. Okay. And I think that they'll be looking at him and hoping that nobody else really snatches him up. And I don't think it's really going to happen, but I think it's possible. But unlikely that he goes to another team. I think the Bills will be able to get him onto the practice squad. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players to add, which brings us to 49. Oh my gosh, not 449. 49.
We did pretty good because this one's going to be easy then.
Yeah, kind of. Like, all right. So Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, we know that they're on this team. They're this is their last stance, if you want to call it that. I feel pretty confident in Taylor Rapp. He's talked about his future with this team, so I would imagine he's on this team for 2023. Damar Hamlin. I cannot possibly imagine a scenario where the Bills announce to the world that Damar Hamlin has been cut from the Buffalo Bills.
Especially because he's looked good. If he looked bad
right,
in preseason,
that's the thing, right? Like he's looked like somebody who had a perfectly normal season and like nothing ever happened to him where his life may or may not have been on the line. Like he looks like Damar Hamlin, right? And that's what you wanted to see out of the preseason. And honestly, even if he didn't, I'd be hard pressed saying that the Bills were just going to cut him at the end of August. So I feel pretty confident calling Damar Hamlin on this team. Now, that leaves us with two guys. We just talked about Dean Marlowe. I think they would love to bring Dean Marlowe back on the practice squad. Whether or not he gets claimed by another team, whole other story. So I'm going to call Dean Marlowe practice squad with the caveat he could very, very easily go to another team. And Zane Anderson, largely a special teams guy, if I'm remembering correctly. Practice squad guy, do you feel like?
He could be, but I feel like at that point it's a lot of DBs. You know, we're talking Alex Austin, Jamarcus, and I don't know if they'd rather have Dean Marlowe than Zane Anderson is what I'll say about that.
That's fair. I think that's fair. So
and as far as Dean Marlowe goes, he because he's a veteran, vested veteran, right. So some team would have to reach out to him and say, hey, we want you, and he has to agree to go. He doesn't have to. I don't think Dean Marlowe goes if some team calls. I think he says, I'll stay in Buffalo.
Do you feel like another team would offer him a little bit more money?
They'd have to offer him a pretty when he got traded back to the Bills last year, he posted, his wife posted a video crying how happy they were and saying like how Buffalo's home and we never wanted to leave and we can't wait to come back. And I keep going back to that is like, it would take a pretty big offer, I think, from somebody else to drive Dean Marlowe there. And I don't think no one's going to be like, hey, Dean, we'll offer you $6 million. Like, that's not going to happen.
Fair. So. That's fair. Okay. So Zane Anderson, we're calling it cut. And Dean Marlowe on the practice squad. All right. We are now officially at 53 players on this roster. I like it. I like... So we're just going to very quickly go over everything. At quarterback, Josh Allen and best buddy Kyle Allen are making the team. Matt Barkley to the practice squad. At running back, James Cook, Damian Harris, Latavius Murray, all making the roster. Jordan Mims and Ty Johnson are cuts. And Darrington Evans to the practice squad. Fullback, Reggie Gilliam makes the team. Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, and Khalil Shakir all make the roster to start. Andy Isabella is cut and brought back as he is not subject to waivers. Justin Shorter also makes the roster. Tyrell Shavers to the practice squad. Brian Thompson, Marcel Aitman, and Keyshawn Johnson all get cut. At tight end, Knox, Kincaid, and Morris all make the roster. Joel Wilson is cut. At offensive tackle, Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, along with Ryan Van DeMark and Alec Anderson, are all making the roster. David Questenberry and Richard Garage, we would like to see back on the practice squad, but we'll see what happens with both of them. At guard, Connor McGovern, David Edwards, Osiris Torrance all make the roster. Nick Broker onto the practice squad. Ike Bucker as a potential trade candidate, and Kevin Jarvis and Greg Mance as cut guys. At center, Mitch Morse and Ryan Bates make the roster. At defensive tackle, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Jordan Phillips, Poona Ford, and Tim Settle all make the final roster. Eli Enko and DJ Dale all go to the practice squad. Kendall Vickers gets cut. At defensive end, Greg Rousseau is a starter. AJ Epinesa, Leonard Floyd, Kingsley Jonathan, Shaq Lawson all make the roster. Von Miller is on the PUP list. And then Boogie Basham is a potential trade candidate, and Cameron Klein to the practice squad. And then we're talking about middle linebacker. We've got Terrell Bernard and AJ Klein making the team. Tyrell Dotson cut. Balin Spector to IR. Matt Milano at weak side linebacker makes the team. Dorian Williams as his backup. Tyler Matakevich as a special teams only guy. Trayvon Howard to the practice squad. At corner, Trey White, Christian Benford, Dane Jackson, Kyer Elam, and Sarandio all make the roster. Kyron Brown is cut. Jamarcus Ingram, Alex Austin, and Cam Lewis all come to the practice squad. At Taron Johnson's position is Taron Johnson. He makes the team. Good for him. He is Taron Johnson 1. At safety, you have Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, DeMar Hamlin and Taylor Rapp backing him up, and Dean Marlowe to the practice squad, Zane Anderson as a cut candidate, and starting kicker Tyler Bass, starting punter Sam Martin, both make the roster. We have put 2 asterisks next to Reed Ferguson to be brought back after a cut. We've talked about it a couple times during this whole thing. Somebody might that they feel like they need to have on the roster, and then they'll do a little manipulation and they'll bring back Reed Ferguson. So don't panic if you see Reed Ferguson come across the timeline as Reed Ferguson has been cut by the Bills. Relax. They'll have a long snapper and his name will be Reed Ferguson. So that is your 53-man roster, and Jordan Poyer's driver asks the most important question of the night. Is this a Super Bowl roster?
Yeah, it's better than last year's roster. I honestly believe that. So I don't. Last year's roster was considered the best in the NFL. Then the injury bug hit. This year's roster is better. So I think this is a Super Bowl roster.
I agree. I think that they have some really great depth at certain spots like wide receiver and corner. I think they have some really interesting young guys. I mean, somebody like Ryan Van DeMark is super interesting to me. It'll be really, really interesting to see if he gets any playing time and where it'll happen. Obviously, really excited about Osiris Torrance at guard. Super exciting that it seems like he's fully gotten this starting job right out of the gate. I think that's a credit to him, the scouts for seeing it, and then for Aaron Cromer for coaching him up and taking a guy that is not necessarily in his mold and really coaching him up to be a starting guard in the league and in this particular offense. I think that's going to be a really great thing. The real question marks have just been what they've been the entire offseason, which is at Mike linebacker and at right tackle. Is Spencer Brown going to be good enough to not be a liability? And the same could be said at Mike linebacker, whoever is at Mike linebacker, whether that's Terrell Bernard or AJ Klein or Christian Kirksey, if they decide to bring Christian Kirksey in. And you know, we could do a whole other scenario where we have Christian Kirksey on this roster right now, but that throws a whole wrench into how we just constructed everything. And I really don't want to have to go through that. So just be aware that, like, Christian Kirksey is well in our thoughts and minds, but we're not going to entertain an idea of making an entire roster and changing how this roster looks for a player that is not likely to be on this roster. So, yeah, I feel pretty confident in this Super Bowl caliber roster. I think this is a very good team, and I think that, you know, as long as your starting quarterback doesn't injure his UCL in the middle of the season, the offense will probably find a little more consistency. Having guys like Deontay Hardy and Dalton Kincaid will help with that, I think. Osiris Torrance also probably helps with that, with protection, and also open up the run game with James Cook. Having Damian Harrison and Latavius Murray take the load off in short yardage situations helps. This team has clearly upgraded in certain spots. I wish they had upgraded in other spots as well. It is what it is, but for what, there's no perfect team in the NFL, right? Like, we all kind of view other teams. We look at teams that the Bills have lost to, like the Bengals and the Chiefs. And I think it's easy to kind of overlook where they might have deficiencies on their rosters, but they do. Like, there's no perfect team in the NFL. You look at the Chiefs, their tackle situation, I don't feel better about it than the Bills' tackle situation, to be perfectly honest. It's a lot of unknowns for the Chiefs right now at tackle. And
on both sides of the ball.
On both sides of the ball, right? Like, Chris Jones is their best defensive player, and he says, yeah, I'll wait until week 8. I'll hold out until week 8, which, like, let's hope so. But it's like that's not a perfect team. That is a team that has its holes, and I mean, you look at wide receiver, like, it's a lot. There's a lot of excitement for the Chiefs at wide receiver. I wouldn't call it like a ton of secure, surefire guys. Like, I'd be excited for Rashee Rice and Sky Moore and maybe even Justin Ross, but I'm not sitting here saying like every team in the NFL has to look out for those guys because they're going to be superstars. I don't know, maybe, but you can't say for certain. The point being, right, it's just that we're all looking at this team, and the obvious holes feel more obvious to us because we've looked at this team and we've been with this team and we've evaluated everything, and it feels like, why are we not making decisions here to fix those particular spots? The same could be said about a whole lot of other teams, even contending teams. You look at, the Bengals, right? They lost both of their safeties, and their solution right now is hoping that Dax Hill turns into a legitimate player, and he might. He was a talented player and played well for them last year. And then they signed Nick Scott, right, from the Rams, who was like okay for the Rams. But do you feel confident in him taking Von Bell's role in that defense? And being the same type of player that can do all the different things that Lou Anarumo's defense asks them to do? I don't know. Their quarterback situation is not great. It's, again, a lot of young or unproven players. Like, every team has its flaws. Bills, Bengals, Chiefs, Arizona, Houston, whatever. Like, all of these teams have flaws. It's a matter of looking at the roster as a whole and saying, like, this is a really good roster. This is a team that can genuinely, truly win the Super Bowl. So that's how I feel.
All the two holes that the Bills have, which is very obviously right tackle and the Mike linebacker spot, I feel like everything that they added this offseason has helped to mitigate the issues they have at those spots. You go on the offensive side of the ball, you add a gigantic behemoth of a man in Osiris Torrance to sit right next to Spencer Brown. That should, in theory, improve that spot. You give you give Josh Allen Dalton Kincaid, that gives him the pressure valve he needs. On the other side of the ball, you bring in a Puna Ford to help keep the offensive linemen from getting to the linebackers, and you get a little healthier behind them, and all of a sudden you've created this team that, while it does have its weaknesses, they got better. It should improve those weaknesses. It should make them not as prevalent, not as obvious when we're watching them play on Sundays and 2 weeks from today against the New York Jets.
I agree. I am going to call that an end to this podcast. Folks, thank you all for joining us on a very long and lengthy discussion about the Bills' 53-man roster projection. One of the best things that we are always excited to do, and especially as we are approaching a new season of football, is our wonderful subscription service, and that is Cover One Pass. Folks, for $57 a year, you get the best content you can possibly get in the NFL, especially for the Buffalo Bills. You get exclusive members-only content. You get more in-depth analysis, more player breakdowns, scouting reports, analytics analysis. You get access to Greg Thompson's series about the salary cap. If you ever had questions about the salary cap, that is the man, and his series about the salary cap will answer so many questions and maybe even create some more questions for you of how this all works. But it's a great series. It's worth watching. You also get a nice t-shirt and a decal, and who doesn't love swag like that? So you all, and really, more importantly than anything else, you get access to the Cover One Slack channel with all sorts of Bills fans, all talking about a whole host of different things throughout the week. They're with you on game day. It's a great place to be. It's seriously worth it. I mean, $57 a year, it's an amazing value for what you're getting. And we truly love and appreciate everyone that's a One Pass member. We are so grateful for all of you. Really love and appreciate the support. If you're not a One Pass member, we appreciate you watching this. Also, leave a like below on YouTube. Subscribe to us wherever on YouTube or wherever you're getting your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, pretty much any podcast channel. Wherever you're listening to this on, go on there, subscribe to us, leave a 5-star review, or an actual honest review. That's fine too. I'm not going to be picky about it, but a 5-star review is sort of what we're shooting for here. But interact with us, share us, like us, put some comments below on YouTube. We'll answer them throughout the week. Very, very grateful for every single one of you. Really looking forward to a new regular season. Uber, where can the people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at UberHansen. Finishing up a series this week, scouting each of the AFC East teams. The Buffalo Bills is my final team, so that'll be dropping Wednesday. Also dropped a 2-piece write-up with the help of Chris Janke on the practice squad, detailing rules of the practice squad in part 1, and then just a prediction that we have for the practice squad. Both of those are up on the Cover One website right now.
You all can find me at DFAUXY or at DFoxy. I do a weekly recap after each game. We are also here every Monday on the Cover One Roundup. Very much looking forward to doing a whole season with you, Uber, at my side. Very, very excited about this. It's going to be a lot of fun. Folks, the regular season is right around the corner. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got college football this Saturday, this whole weekend. If anyone is all that interested, I feel like Western New York is not a college football place. I feel like this is not a college football type of area. But hey, if you've got your team, they're probably playing this weekend, and you get to see them for the first time. Football is back, folks, and we are looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us on the Cover One Roundup.